You think power in America belongs to men in Italian suits, giving speeches to corporate boards? You are wrong. Real power lies in quiet binary code. The algorithms controlling a $2 billion grid and deciding if your city has electricity tomorrow. I write those lines. When an executive tried to steal my work, he never realized he was signing his own death warrant. Never corner a systems engineer. We do not scream. We quietly reprogram your reality. Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us. Now, let's begin the story. My name is Harper Ward. I am the lead architect of the core project at Aeronexus Energy Solutions. If you have ever flipped a light switch on the eastern seaboard and taken for granted that the room would illuminate, you have me to thank. I manage the power grid allocation algorithm, a massive, interconnected beast of a system valued at $2 billion. It was built specifically for a major United States government infrastructure agency to ensure that power flows exactly where it needs to, exactly when it needs to. I do not deal in corporate synergy, quarterly projections, or marketing campaigns. I deal in pure, unadulterated stability. I built a network that is absolutely fail-safe. It is a digital fortress designed so meticulously that it is functionally impossible to crash. Regardless of how massive the power overload might be, every variable is accounted for, every electrical surge is buffered, and every catastrophic failure scenario is mitigated by layers upon layers of redundant safety protocols. I take immense pride in that unyielding stability. It is my life's work. Then came Vance Sterling. Vance was our newly appointed Vice President of Integration. He did not come from electrical engineering, structural dynamics, or any sector involving critical national infrastructure. He came from the flashy smoke and mirrors world of Silicon Valley consumer application startups. Rumor had it he sold a grocery delivery application for $80 million and suddenly believed he was a visionary. He was the kind of man who wore custom Italian suits to a server farm, used phrases like growth hacking and disruptive synergy without a hint of irony, and viewed engineering not as a strict discipline of physics, but as an annoying obstacle to his profit margins. He was brought into Aeronexus Energy Solutions for one singular purpose, which was to optimize profits and make the balance sheets look incredibly attractive for the upcoming fiscal quarter. He did not understand the physical reality of the grid. He only understood what he could package and sell to investors. The inevitable collision between my reality and his delusion happened on an early Tuesday morning. Vance called me into his glass-walled corner office, flashing a bright, heavily practiced smile that did not quite reach his cold eyes. He poured himself a glass of imported sparkling water and leaned across his expansive mahogany desk. "Harper, we need to talk about the core algorithm," Vance said, adjusting his heavy gold watch. "I was reviewing the output metrics last night. We are leaving a tremendous amount of money on the table. I need you to go in and strip out those safety buffers in the source code. We need to push the grid to run at 110% capacity on paper. It will create a spectacular, groundbreaking report for the investors next month." I stared at him, genuinely trying to process the sheer magnitude of his arrogance. I did not blink, nor did I break eye contact. "No," I replied, my voice completely flat and devoid of emotion. "Those are not friendly suggestions. Vance, they are hard technical safety limits. You cannot run a physical power grid at 110% capacity. The transformers will literally overheat and melt. If you remove those buffers, we risk a cascading blackout across 3 entire states. Hospitals will lose emergency power, traffic grids will fail, real people will face severe consequences." Vance waved his manicured hand dismissively, as if I had just complained about the quality of the office coffee. "You legacy engineers always catastrophize everything," he chuckled, shaking his head. "It is just software. Harper, we push the update. We show the venture capitalists the peak performance numbers, and if things get a little hot, we just patch it later, move fast and break things. That is how we win in the modern market. This is not a dating application, I stated coldly, leaning forward. We do not move fast and break physical infrastructure. My answer is absolutely not. I will never authorize that change. The smile instantly dropped from his face. The polished corporate mask slipped, revealing the petty, vindictive tyrant underneath. But Vance did not fire me on the spot. Firing me would require cause, human resources involvement, and potentially a very messy legal battle regarding safety whistleblowing. Instead, he chose the coward's route. He chose corporate exile. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, my administrative access credentials to the primary servers were abruptly revoked. I was escorted by 2 security guards, not out of the building, but down into the subterranean levels of the facility. I was relocated to a secondary, completely obsolete server hub located deep in a sub-basement covered in years of accumulated dust. It was a concrete tomb filled with decommissioned hardware, tangled wires, and the incessant, deafening hum of failing cooling fans. He did not stop at simply moving my desk. The next morning, I received an automated email from Human Resources. My official title had been forcefully changed from lead system architect to redundant contractor. The system coldly noted that I was pending contract termination, giving me exactly 30 days to pack up my life. He was systematically isolating me from my engineering team, stripping away my authority, and burying me where no one could hear my technical objections. Vance thought he had won. He thought he had neutralized the threat by tossing me into the dark and taking unilateral control of my beautiful $2 billion machine. He genuinely believed I would simply sit in the dust, collect my final paychecks, and fade away into corporate obscurity while he paraded my algorithm around as his own brilliant creation. But Vance Sterling made a fatal miscalculation. He assumed that because I was out of sight, I was entirely out of the system. He forgot that the architect who meticulously builds the fortress always knows where the hidden access doors are. And down in that freezing, forgotten basement, surrounded by the ghosts of old, discarded hardware, I did not feel defeated or broken. Instead, I felt a cold, calculating focus wash over my mind. The game had not ended. He had merely given me the perfect, unmonitored environment to quietly reprogram his reality. The sub-basement was exactly 42 degrees Fahrenheit, a miserable, damp chill that seeped through the thick rubber soles of my boots and settled deep into my bones. I sat perfectly still on a wobbly aluminum step stool, surrounded by towering, cage-like racks of dead servers. The absolute silence was only broken by the rhythmic dripping of a leaky condensation pipe in the far corner and the occasional scurry of something small in the shadows. But I was not wasting my time weeping over the death of my career. My eyes were busy scanning the rusted back panels of a forgotten terminal block hidden behind a mountain of discarded cardboard boxes. Vance's shiny new cybersecurity contractors had been thorough. They had immediately locked down the entire wireless network, revoked my badges, and physically severed my optical fiber connections to the main floor. They were highly paid, highly confident, and incredibly young. They only looked for modern vulnerabilities. They did not know the physical, architectural history of this concrete bunker. They did not know that a decade ago, during the very first phase of the grid's construction, the original engineers needed a way to test the hardware before the software firewalls were built. Behind a tangled rat king of gray cables from 10 years ago, my fingers brushed against cold, brushed steel. I found it. A dusty analog physical diagnostic port. It was a relic, hardwired directly into the facility's central nervous system, bypassing every single modern security protocol Vance had purchased. I blew the dust out of the connector, plugged in my personal heavy-duty laptop, and hit the power button. A black screen flickered to life. A single white command prompt blinked. I was inside. Working entirely through the command line, stripped of any graphical interface, I began constructing a ghost node. I did not need to control the system yet. I only needed to watch it. Over the next 6 hours, my fingers flew across the keyboard as I meticulously wove a hidden monitoring relay into the vast rivers of data flowing above me. It operated like a digital parasite. It was a passive listener that simply absorbed and mirrored the telemetry from the main servers without transmitting a single packet of its own back into the network. It would never trigger a security alarm. I could now see every data packet, every command line execution, and every keystroke happening in the sunlit, climate-controlled offices 50 feet above my head. On Thursday afternoon, at roughly 2:15, the incoming data streams began to bleed red on my screen. I watched, my jaw clenching so hard my teeth ached, as the core source code vault was forcibly unsealed. Vance was not doing the dirty work himself. Of course, he lacked the technical vocabulary to even read the code. He had cornered 3 junior programmers, kids fresh out of university who were too terrified of losing their paychecks to question a vice president. Line by line, character by character, I watched them systematically delete my load limit algorithms. They were gutting the thermal regulation thresholds. They were severing the automated surge diversion routes. The structural integrity of a $2 billion physical grid was being completely lobotomized in real time, just so Vance could present a fabricated, utterly suicidal graph showing the grid running at 110% efficiency to the board of directors. It was professionally sickening, but then, 20 minutes later, the telemetry log showed something that made the blood run absolutely cold in my veins. When the junior engineers finished deleting the critical safety protocols, a master digital signature was required to commit those fatal changes to the live server. Usually, the lead engineer authorizing the change provides this cryptographic key. I watched the system verify the signature. The system did not register Vance Sterling's credentials. It registered mine. "You absolute snake," I whispered to the glowing monitor, the sound of my own voice startling me in the empty room. Vance had not simply revoked my access. Before locking me out, he had maliciously cloned my administrative token. He was using my digital ghost to sign off on the destruction of my own safety buffers. If the grid crashed next week, if those physical transformers overheated and blew, plunging half the eastern seaboard into total darkness, the federal investigators would not see Vance's name on the catastrophic code update. They would see my name. He was building an ironclad, time-stamped paper trail to frame me. I was not just being unceremoniously fired. I was being meticulously set up as the sole legal scapegoat for a massive, multi-state infrastructure disaster. He was trying to send me to federal prison so he could get a bonus. Panic is a useless, wasteful emotion for a systems engineer. When a machine presents a fatal error, you do not scream, you debug, you isolate the fault, you neutralize the threat. I opened a new, heavily encrypted directory on my local hard drive. If he wanted a paper trail, I would build him a graveyard. I began scraping the deepest layers of the network data, meticulously logging every single piece of metadata hidden beneath the user interface. I traced the unauthorized credential usage straight back through the network switches, bypassing the proxy servers, until I pinned down the private, static IP address of Vance's sleek desktop computer sitting in his corner office. I captured the exact hour, minute, and second he issued the commands to the juniors. I quietly downloaded the original, uncorrupted source code, placing it side by side with the butchered, highly dangerous version his team was currently uploading. I recorded the instant messages he sent to the young engineers, threatening their employment if they did not hurry up and alter the numbers. I compiled all of this irrefutable data into a single, undeniable master file. Every keystroke, every cloned login attempt, every IP ping, and every deleted line of code. It was a perfect chronological chain of evidence documenting high-level corporate sabotage and federal fraud. I named the file Log 0. Log 0 was not just a backup, it was a digital guillotine, hovering silently in the dark. I sat back on the cold aluminum stool, staring at the flashing cursor on my screen. Vance had stolen my keys and used them to rig the entire building with explosives. but he had absolutely no idea that the architect was sitting directly beneath him, calmly holding the detonator. If I marched upstairs to Human Resources with log 0 in my hand right then, I would have achieved absolutely nothing. Corporate human resources departments do not exist to protect employees. They exist to protect the company from liability. To them, I would just be a disgruntled, soon-to-be-terminated engineer spinning wild conspiracy theories because I could not handle the new management style. Vance would simply claim my files were fabricated, and with his title and his expensive lawyers, he would win. I needed undeniable, spectacular proof. I needed to weaponize Vance Sterling's own blinding arrogance. Through my hidden analog connection, I reached deep into the foundational layers of the grid architecture. I began writing a new subroutine. It was a beautiful, elegant piece of logic that I called the stress test echo. On the surface, it looked like a highly advanced diagnostic tool designed to monitor load distribution. It was entirely valid code, completely harmless, and designed to lay completely dormant as long as the system's safety buffers were securely in place. However, if those buffers were ever removed, and the grid was forced to run past 100% capacity, the Echo would wake up. It would instantly seize control of the central operating system, freeze the physical grid to prevent a meltdown, and broadcast its diagnostic findings. It was a failsafe wrapped in a landmine. I carefully encrypted the trigger mechanism, left the outer shell looking like a brilliant, unfinished optimization protocol, and planted it right in the middle of the active development branch. Then, I waited. In a game of chess, the most satisfying move is not taking the opponent's queen. It is watching the opponent confidently move their own queen directly into your trap. It took exactly 4 days for Vance to take the bait. I watched his screen activity through my ghost node. He was desperately scanning the codebase, looking for any leftover, high-level code he could package and present to the board as his own groundbreaking innovation. His cursor hovered over the stress test echo. I could almost see the gears turning in his head. He ran a surface-level simulation. The simulation told him the code mapped power pathways with unprecedented efficiency. Because he did not understand the underlying physics, he did not realize it was an emergency lockdown protocol. He only saw dollar signs. With a few arrogant clicks, he highlighted my code, deleted my author tag, and literally typed his own name over it. He rebranded my trap as the Sterling Mutual Analysis Algorithm. He immediately pushed it to the live presentation server, cementing it as the crown jewel of his upcoming demonstration. Down in the freezing sub-basement, I leaned back against the concrete wall and allowed myself a long, cold smile. He had just stolen the ultimate career-ending glitch and proudly stamped his own signature on it. But a bomb going off in a forest makes no sound if the right people are not there to witness it. I needed an audience with real power. At 10 o'clock on a rainy Thursday night, I slipped out of the Aeronexus building through the freight exit. I drove 40 minutes into the sprawling suburbs to a greasy, neon-lit diner located right off the interstate. The air inside smelled of stale coffee and fried onions, and the noise from the jukebox and the highway traffic created a perfect acoustic shield against eavesdropping. Sitting in a cracked vinyl booth at the very back was Elena Rostova. Elena was the chief inspector for the federal infrastructure agency that was actually purchasing our grid system. She was a woman who had spent 30 years surviving Washington politics. She did not suffer fools, and she absolutely despised corporate executives who played games with national security. I slid into the booth across from her. She did not smile. She took a slow sip of her black coffee. "You look like a woman who has been buried alive." "Harper," Elena said, her voice cutting through the diner noise with absolute authority. "I have been," I replied, pulling a small, encrypted titanium hard drive from my coat pocket and sliding it across the sticky table. "But I have been very busy underground." Elena glanced at the drive, then back up at my eyes. She did not reach for it immediately. "What is this?" she asked. "It is a decryption key," I stated simply. "Next Tuesday morning, Vance Sterling is going to host a massive live stress test of the new system in Washington. He is going to try and show you that the grid can run at 110% capacity. He is going to use an algorithm he claims he invented. And I assume he did not invent it, Elena noted dryly. I am not asking you to intervene, Elena. I am not asking you to launch an investigation or take my word against a vice president. All I ask is that you bring this drive to the presentation, plug it into your agency's secure tablet, and keep your eyes on the secondary display screen when the power output crosses the 100% mark. The system will tell you exactly what you need to know. Elena finally reached out and closed her hand over the drive. She had known my work for 5 years. She knew I did not bluff. She gave me a single, infinitesimal nod and dropped the drive into her purse. I will be watching the screen, she said. I left the diner and drove straight back to the Aeronexus sub-basement. I spent the next 6 hours finalizing the trap, locking the encryption on log 0, and routing the broadcast channels directly to the presentation servers. The board was set. The pieces were locked in place. The network was now a ticking time bomb, and the only person capable of lighting the fuse was the man who thought he controlled the entire world. The final week of the handover was a masterclass in corporate sycophancy. Through my hidden terminal, I monitored the internal communications network. The entire company was drowning in an ocean of fake adulation. Executives who did not know the difference between a megawatt and a microchip were sending company-wide emails praising Vance Sterling and his unparalleled strategic vision. The internal chat channels were flooded with congratulatory emojis and nauseating praise for a man who was actively destroying the system they were supposed to protect. It was a suffocating environment, toxic and entirely disconnected from physical reality. On Wednesday afternoon, Vance hosted a mandatory, virtual all-hands meeting. I watched the video feed from my cold concrete exile. There were over 300 faces on the screen. Vance stood in the center of the main conference room, looking perfectly tailored, exuding the unearned confidence of a man who had never faced a real consequence in his life. Before we dive into the incredible future of Aeronexus, Vance began, adopting a tone of rehearsed, sugary sadness, I want to briefly acknowledge a transition within our team. Harper Ward has decided to move on to other opportunities. We thank her for her legacy contributions. However, as we pivot toward a more dynamic, agile framework, we require leadership that looks forward, not backward. It was a brilliantly toxic execution. He framed my forced exile as an inability to keep up with his genius. I felt my jaw tighten, but I kept my hands completely still on my keyboard. And looking forward, Vance continued, his voice rising in manufactured excitement, I am incredibly proud to unveil the core of our new deployment. Over the past month, I have personally developed a proprietary logic gateway. I call it the Sterling Mutual Analysis Algorithm. This historic breakthrough will allow us to push the grid well beyond its old rigid physical boundaries. He was practically glowing as he displayed a slide showing the power capacity soaring into the red zone. On the video call, I noticed a few of the younger engineers shifting uncomfortably in their chairs. Finally, one of the junior developers raised a digital hand. His voice trembled slightly when he spoke. Excuse me, Vance, with the safety limits removed, if a thermal cascade happens under that much load, do we have a physical failsafe in place? The heat generation alone could literally melt the substations. Vance did not even blink. He reached forward and clicked a button on the control console. The junior engineer's microphone icon instantly turned red. He had muted him in front of 300 people. We do not focus on failure metrics in this phase, Vance declared, projecting his voice to dominate the silence. That is an archaic, fear-based engineering mindset. We are optimizing synergy through proactive load distribution. We are disrupting the stagnant utility model. If you cannot align with this paradigm shift, perhaps you are in the wrong industry. He gaslit the entire engineering department in under 40 seconds. The chat went completely dead. No one else dared to ask a question. They were terrified for their livelihoods. The charade dragged on until Friday. At exactly 5 o'clock in the afternoon, the heavy metal door to the sub-basement groaned open. Two large men in black security uniforms stepped into the freezing room. One of them tossed a flat, unfolded cardboard box onto my metal desk. "Time is up, Ms. Ward," the taller guard stated bluntly. "Hand over your identification badge and pack your personal items. We are required to escort you off the premises immediately." They treated me like a dangerous industrial spy. They watched my hands closely as I placed a few mechanical pens, a notebook, and my coffee mug into the cardboard box. I did not argue. I did not shout or demand to see human resources. I slowly unclipped my plastic identification badge and handed it over to the guard. As they marched me toward the freight elevator, I glanced back one last time at the mountain of dead servers hiding my ghost node. The trap was armed. They walked me out through the rear loading dock. The sky had broken open, and a heavy, freezing rain was pouring down on the asphalt. The security guards stood under the concrete awning, watching me walk out into the storm. I did not run. I walked slowly across the empty parking lot, letting the icy rain soak completely through my coat. I felt no humiliation. I felt an absolute, terrifying calm. I knew exactly what was waiting on those servers. The Echo was fully loaded. It had locked onto its target. Later that weekend, working from my personal computer in my living room, I intercepted one final piece of internal communication. It was an email from Vance, sent directly to the Aeronexus Board of Directors and our federal government partners late on Sunday night. He was practically vibrating with smugness through the text. He promised them a flawless, historical $2 billion launch on Tuesday morning. He assured them the grid was perfectly ready to be pushed to its absolute limits under his new algorithm. I closed my laptop and listened to the rain hitting my window. He was right. The grid was going to be pushed to its absolute limits, and the entire world was going to watch him break it. Tuesday morning arrived with the crisp, heavy air of power that only Washington District of Columbia could manufacture. The venue for the live stress test was a cavernous, hyper-modern convention center, located just blocks from the federal Capitol building. Thousands of square feet of polished marble floors reflected the harsh white glow of towering glass chandeliers. This was not a humble engineering demonstration. It was a theatrical coronation. The room was steadily filling with an intimidating concentration of wealth and influence. Federal regulators, high-ranking government officials, energy tycoons, and Wall Street executives milled about, their voices merging into a low, continuous hum of anticipation. They wore sharply tailored navy and charcoal suits, exchanging firm handshakes and speaking excitedly about the future of infrastructure investment. They had gathered to witness the unveiling of a $2 billion miracle. Despite being officially blacklisted from Aeronexus Energy Solutions, I did not sneak through a back door or hide in a loading dock. I walked directly through the towering glass front doors. The security perimeter was intense, manned by stern-faced private contractors scanning credentials with tactical precision. When I reached the main checkpoint, the guard held out his hand. I did not offer the standard corporate visitor pass. Instead, I calmly handed him a heavy, solid state federal inspector badge suspended on a titanium lanyard. It was the highest level of security clearance available, quietly and illegally requisitioned for me just 12 hours prior by Elena Rostova. The guard slid the card through his scanner. The machine chirped a pleasant green tone of absolute approval. He handed it back with a sharp, respectful nod. I smiled politely and walked straight into the lion's den. The grand auditorium was breathtaking in its scale. Stadium seating sloped dramatically down toward a massive, elevated stage framed by monolithic speaker columns. I deliberately bypassed the brightly lit middle sections where the executives were eagerly claiming their seats. I climbed all the way to the absolute back row. Stepping into the deep shadows cast by the overhanging balcony, I claimed a seat in the absolute darkest corner of the hall. Down there, surrounded by the blinding glow of smartphones and the gleam of expensive watches, I was completely invisible. I was a ghost haunting the machinery of their greed. The house lights dimmed to a dramatic, deep blue. A hushed silence fell over the massive crowd. A single, brilliant white spotlight snapped on, illuminating the center of the stage. Vance Sterling strode out from behind the curtain. looking like a conquering emperor. He wore a flawless, midnight blue bespoke suit that probably cost more than a junior engineer's annual salary. He wore a wireless microphone headset, keeping his hands completely free to gesture and command the physical space. Behind him, an enormous wall-to-wall light-emitting diode screen roared to life, displaying a beautifully rendered, glowing map of the eastern seaboard's power grid. Vance began to speak, and I had to admit, he was a master manipulator. He did not talk about ohms, voltage regulations, or thermal dynamics. He spoke the language of the room. He talked about unprecedented profit margins, dominating global energy markets, and ushering in a golden era of flawless efficiency. He paced back and forth, using his hands to paint illusions in the air. The massive screen behind him shifted, displaying soaring line graphs and projected revenue charts painted in vibrant neon green. It was a masterpiece of corporate fiction. The audience was completely mesmerized, leaning forward in their velvet-lined seats, thoroughly intoxicated by the promise of endless, risk-free capital. From my vantage point in the absolute dark, I slowly scanned the front rows. My eyes locked onto the heavily guarded, very important persons section directly in front of the stage. Sitting perfectly straight in the very center chair was Elena Rostova. She was not looking at Vance. She had a sleek, government-issued tablet resting flat on her lap. Protruding slightly from the side of the device was the silver titanium hard drive I had given her at the diner. For a fraction of a second, Elena turned her head slightly. Across the massive, darkened expanse of the auditorium, our eyes met. Her expression remained completely frozen in stone, but she gave one single, microscopic nod. The payload was connected. She was watching the secondary data streams. On stage, Vance brought his booming monologue to a triumphant crescendo. He threw his arms wide open, turning his back to the audience to face the massive screen. A digital gauge appeared, displaying the current load capacity resting at a safe 75%. Down in the sunken control pit off to the right side of the stage, a team of terrified Aeronexus technicians sat hunched over their command consoles, their hands trembling over their keyboards. "Ladies and gentlemen," Vance declared, his voice echoing like thunder through the immense hall. "The era of playing it safe is over. It is time to show you the true power of the Sterling Mutual Analysis algorithm. Control room, disable the legacy limiters. Push the real-time simulation exactly to 100% capacity. Let us light up the world." The quiet, suffocating tension in the room snapped. The storm had finally arrived. The technicians in the pit hesitated for a fraction of a second, but Vance barked the order again. Their fingers hit the execution keys. On the colossal light-emitting diode screen, the glowing digital power gauge began to surge upward. It crossed 80%, then 90%. The crowd held its collective breath. 95%, 99%. Exactly at 100%, the grand crescendo Vance had promised died in its tracks. There was no thunderous applause. There was no triumphant green flash of a successful test. Instead, the entire simulation froze solid. A heavy, sickening silence hung over the auditorium for exactly 2 seconds, down in the foundational architecture of the network. My stress test echo woke from its slumber. It instantly recognized that the critical safety limits had been completely severed. It executed its primary directive. A deafening, bone-rattling mechanical klaxon alarm suddenly erupted from the monolithic speaker columns, vibrating through the chest cavities of every billionaire and politician in the room. The beautiful neon green map of the eastern seaboard abruptly vanished. The entire massive screen violently shifted to a blinding, blood-red hue. Giant, blocky white letters began flashing rhythmically across the 2-story display. "Warning system overload. Illegal interference detected." A wave of panicked murmurs rippled through the audience. Men in expensive suits began shifting nervously, grabbing their encrypted mobile phones. On stage, Vance dropped his arms, his manicured corporate mask instantly shattered, replaced by a look of absolute, unadulterated terror. He tapped his wireless microphone headset aggressively. "Control room! Shut that off!" Vance yelled, his voice cracking with panic over the massive audio system. "Reboot the simulation. Bypass the warning." The terrified technicians hammered at their keyboards, but they were completely locked out. My Echo had seized root access to the entire framework, and then the true execution began. The flashing red warning dissolved, replaced by the stark, brutal black and white interface of a command terminal. My command had not just frozen the system, it had forced the primary server to broadcast Log 0 live to the entire convention center. Rows upon rows of raw, irrefutable data began scrolling down the colossal screen. It was a digital autopsy displayed for the world to see. First came the unencrypted network logs, clearly highlighting Vance's private protocol address. Next came the exact time-stamped commands, showing his terminal bypassing the security vault. But the absolute killing blow was the communication transcripts. Giant, high-definition screenshots of Vance's internal chat messages to the junior engineers flooded the display. The text was magnified so large that the federal regulators in the back row could read it without glasses. "Delete the thermal limiters," the message on the screen read, accompanied by Vance's official digital signature. "I do not care about the physical risk parameters. I need the capacity numbers at 110% by Friday, or you are all looking for new jobs." A collective gasp echoed through the cavernous hall. The murmurs turned into an uproar. Wall Street executives who had been ready to write 9-figure checks suddenly stood up, their faces pale with anger. They were looking at hard, undeniable proof of massive corporate fraud and critical infrastructure sabotage. Vance stumbled backward on the stage, physically retreating from the towering wall of evidence behind him. Sweat poured down his perfectly styled hair. He raised his hands defensively toward the hostile crowd. "It is a glitch," Vance stammered wildly into his microphone, his voice echoing with desperate shrillness. "This is a fabricated hack. It is a software bug planted by a bitter former contractor. We were sabotaged." "You were not sabotaged, Mr. Sterling. You were caught." The voice did not come from the stage. It came from the front row. Elena Rostova stood up. She did not yell, but she spoke with the terrifying absolute authority of the federal government. She bypassed the stairs and stepped directly onto the low riser of the stage, walking right up to the podium. She reached out and physically turned off Vance's microphone console. "By the authority vested in me by the Federal Infrastructure Oversight Committee," Elena announced, her unamplified voice cutting through the chaos like a knife, "I am immediately revoking your security clearance, your administrative access, and your physical control of this project. You have just broadcast your own felony fraud to the United States government." Elena gestured to the perimeter. 4 federal security agents in dark suits immediately unclipped their radios and began marching down the center aisle toward the stage. Vance looked left, then right, like a trapped animal, but there was nowhere to run. The mathematical proofs burning brightly on the screen behind him had completely stripped away his power. Amidst the total collapse of Vance's empire, Elena picked up the backup wired microphone from the podium. She looked out into the absolute darkness of the auditorium's back rows. "Harper Ward," Elena's voice rang out, commanding and clear. "Please come down here and fix your machine." I stood up from my seat in the shadows. I did not rush. I walked slowly down the long, carpeted aisle. The only sound I made was the sharp, rhythmic clicking of my low heels against the floor. As I moved into the light, the crowd of billionaires, politicians, and executives physically parted ways for me. They stared in stunned silence. I kept my eyes locked dead ahead. I did not even look at Vance as I stepped onto the stage. He was already irrelevant. I walked past him, feeling the heat of his panic, and approached the central control terminal. The technicians quickly moved out of my way. I placed my hands on the keyboard. The system was locked down tight, rejecting all external inputs, but it recognized its creator. I typed a single decryption key consisting of exactly 12 characters. I hit the enter key. Instantly, the blaring alarm ceased. The suffocating red light vanished from the room. The massive screen flickered, cleared the terminal logs, and smoothly transitioned back to the beautiful, stable map of the eastern seaboard grid. The power capacity gauge reset, locking perfectly at a safe, sustainable 85%. Green confirmation lights rippled across the control board. The $2 billion beast was purring quietly once again, entirely under my command. A spontaneous, deafening roar of applause erupted from the crowd. It was not the fake, polite applause of corporate synergy. It was the visceral relief of people who had just watched disaster averted by pure competence. The lead federal regulator pushed his way to the front of the stage. Ignoring Vance completely, he looked directly at me. "Ms. Ward," the regulator said loudly over the cheering, "as of this exact second, the government is appointing you as the Chief Technical Operating Officer of this entire deployment. You have full, uncontested control." I nodded once, accepting the reality I had quietly reprogrammed. Out of the corner of my eye, I watched the federal agents forcefully grab Vance by both arms. They escorted him off the stage and out the side door. He was completely silent, his slick career permanently buried beneath the crushing weight of his own arrogance. I looked back at the glowing screens, placed my hands behind my back, and smiled. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it, as an ad-free channel. Your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Boss Revenge Stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, we'd love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you're listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.